The first time I realized a rule could be a locked door with my son on the other side, it was printed in cheerful fonts on a pastel flyer. Father's Day play. Dad's only seating. The paper smelled like the school's copy toner and oranges from the cafeteria. I held it in my kitchen, in a small apartment that still carried the ghost of a life that didn't work out. And I felt two things at once, an ache and a dare. An ache, because Micah had read his line to me all week, standing on a chair with his socks too big and his hair sticking up like sunlight, practicing Happy Father's Day, Dad. Except he wouldn't look at me when he said, Dad. He looked toward a door that stayed shut. And a dare, because I've learned that sometimes love is nothing more glamorous than asking, what would I do if fear didn't get a vote? They told me there'd be a live stream in the overflow room for other family. Other. Like I had been filed into a drawer, polite and out of sight. They didn't know that every night I loosened factory dust from my lungs and counted tips from the diner, that I slept with my phone face up waiting for the nurse hotline's number, that I kept a second set of shoes in the trunk, because you never know when a car will die, and feet must take up the distance. They didn't know that my son still flinched when he heard a certain kind of laughter in the grocery store, the kind his father had. They didn't know I had learned to repair our kitchen sink with YouTube and stubbornness. They didn't know, and they didn't ask. I asked. I wrote an email to the principal, to Ms. Kim, to the PTA list that always began, Dear Families, like it meant me too. I wrote it with care. I'm Micah Mercer's mother. His father is not in the picture. I'm the parent who packs his lunches and tapes his costume seams. Please let me sit where he can see me. I thought that if I told the truth gently enough, it would make room for itself. I got one reply. Thank you for understanding our tradition. Tradition, like brickwork around a window. And then Ms. Kim called after hours. Her voice was careful in the way people speak when they want to say more than they're allowed. June, she said. Micah is one of the narrators. He keeps looking for you when he rehearses. He memorized the rows in the auditorium. She paused, that loaded kind of pause that carries a hallway of closed doors. I'm sorry about the seating. It's complicated. Donors are attending. Donors. A word that meant there were strings somewhere, and I was not allowed to see who pulled them. She lowered her voice. If you do attend, just be early and be careful. It was the be careful that lodged inside me like a splinter, because it sounded like a warning and a blessing. I hung up and stared at our fridge, held together with magnets and the last raffle ticket Micah had brought home from the Fall Fest. In the reflection of its dented silver, I saw myself, hair that refused to be tamed, the long shadow of a year spent learning how to rebuild a life with a child at my hip and another hand always empty. And in that glassy ghost, something occurred to me so suddenly I laughed. The kind of laugh that sounds like a decision snapping into place. If they only let fathers sit where my boy could see, then I would be a father for 1 hour. I didn't think about the morality of it longer than a heartbeat. I thought about Micah's face when he scanned those rows. I thought about how he still said, sometimes at the sink while we washed tangerines, do you think Dad knows I can whistle now? And I thought, fiercely, that children shouldn't have to become magicians just to make their parents appear. So I opened the hall closet where Goodwill finds lived like small acts of faith. I found a charcoal blazer a size too big, a white button-down with 3 stubborn wrinkles, a tie with stripes as serious as a judge. I texted my neighbor, Rosa, who has an artist's hands and a bark of a laugh. Do you have any eyeliner? I wrote. For a mustache. She knocked 5 minutes later, eyeliner in one hand, hair gel in the other. Mija, she said, looking me over like I was already on stage. For love, we do theater. She drew a soft shadow over my lip, squared my eyebrows, pressed my hair under a baseball cap that said, Maple Glen Wildcats. When we were done, I looked like a version of myself I had never imagined, a man from far away who happened to have my eyes. I felt ridiculous and brave and exactly right. We stood in the kitchen and let the silence say what we didn't, that sometimes the world makes a rule and you have to change shape to reach your child. I told no one else. I told myself, get there early, blend into the nervous forest of fathers clutching flowers purchased at gas stations, sit where Micah told me he'd look, 3rd row, left aisle, 2 seats from the end. I told myself to breathe, to keep my head down, to become a shadow with a sun in the light. The flyer lay on the counter, cheerful and cruel. I folded it into a square and slid it into my blazer pocket like a shield. I locked the apartment, kissed Micah's sleeping forehead, and promised the darkness what it wanted to hear. I will not fail him tonight. The auditorium doors opened at 6. The rules were printed again on a sign with decorative stars. Dad's only in front rows. I pulled my cap low and went in with the tide of cologne and nervous jokes. The stage curtain was a slick red promise. Programs were stacked like expecting hands. I took one, more to steady my shaking than to read it. And there, among lists of scene changes and thank yous, a single line snagged my breath. Special thanks to the Collins Family Foundation for supporting fatherhood initiatives. Collins, a name like a match dropped near dry grass. My ex-husband's name. My ex-husband's mother's money. I felt the floor tilt. And in the tilt, I heard what Ms. Kim hadn't said. This wasn't just a play. It was a performance built on power, and power had a seat assignment. I sat anyway. The lights hummed. Fathers jostled. Phones ready. I tucked my hands into borrowed sleeves and tried to become invisible. But the program trembled, and the M of my fake mustache itched. And when I looked up, I saw two things at once. Micah peeking through the curtain, counting rows with his lips, and a familiar profile slipping into the aisle across from me. A profile with a jaw I'd memorized the same way you memorize an emergency exit. He had come, and not alone. The new woman's hand looped into his arm like a ring. My throat tightened into a fist. I told myself not to look again. I told myself to be a rock in a river. But the curtain bell chimed, and I thought I heard someone behind me whisper, "Is that her?" And that was when the house lights dimmed, and the spotlights fattened and the air changed, the way air changes before a storm, and I realized how naive I'd been. I had walked into a theater expecting a simple lie to keep me safe, but the truth had followed me in, taking a seat I hadn't reserved, and waiting for the cue. The first violin note wavered like a warning, and that's when I knew the night would not end the way I'd planned, because the people who write rules rarely allow the wrong person to break them, especially when the wrong person is a mother with a fake mustache and a son who keeps looking for her face. And as the curtain began to part, I saw the envelope taped under my chair with my name on it, and I understood this was not an accident at all, but an ambush with manners. Because when I slid that envelope free and felt the weight of what was inside, I knew the play I came to see wasn't the only thing staged tonight. If you've never walked into a room where your presence breaks a rule just by existing, let me paint you the rest of the picture before the first scene even starts. We live in Maple Glen, Pennsylvania, a town that smiles with its teeth when it wants to hide its jaw. The school is brick and flag and bulletin boards that say things like, "We are family," which is how I know words can be decorations or doors. When Micah brought home the flyer, I tried to do things the way you're supposed to. Polite emails, polite patience, polite belief that explaining ourselves makes people listen. But I have learned that in places like Maple Glen, where the Collins Family Foundation wall is lined with plaques and my ex-mother-in-law cuts ribbons with gold scissors, listening isn't a habit, it's a privilege. And mothers like me are often asked to be grateful for live streams in overflow rooms with plastic chairs. To you watching or reading this, to you who understands that single mothers carry worlds in their purses, I want to say this plainly. The story I'm telling isn't about a costume. It's about custody of visibility. And if stories like mine matter to you, if you've ever been told tradition requires your absence, please hit subscribe, because I am building a small, stubborn community where our names are not footnotes. Say hello in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know the towns that pretend rules are neutral, the schools that put kindness on banners and gates on doors. I want to hear the street names where someone taught you invisibility and you learned rebellion instead. That night started before the night. It started the morning Micah said, "Is it okay if I don't look at the spot we practice, Mom? It hurts when I do." He tried to say it like a scientist recording data, but his voice smudged. I told him the truth. You can look where I am, but where I was officially was not allowed to exist. So I wrote to Principal Harlan Price, careful as a prayer. I explained. I waited. I got an auto reply that said he was in meetings with partners. Partners, we would find out, meant people whose names were in the program. I also texted two other moms whose faces I trust. Rosa, my neighbor, who knows how to fix everything with duct tape and tenderness, and Imani, who serves on the school board and knows the bylaws like their recipes. Imani called me on her lunch break. "They're hiding behind precedent," she said, paper rustling like wings on her end. "There's nothing in policy that bans non-fathers from front rows. It's an event tradition, not a rule." She paused. "But if the Collins check is attached to that tradition, enforcement gets creative." She didn't tell me not to go. She told me to document everything. She told me to expect kindness to arrive as a whisper, and cruelty to arrive as a clipboard. By noon, I knew my ex would be there. Not because he texted. He doesn't. Not unless the court requires it. I knew because a friend at the diner said she'd heard his mother mention our family foundation's big night. The phrase "our family" struck me like a dropped plate. I am not our family, not in rooms with cameras and donors. In those rooms, I am an absence that keeps the story simple. If you're new here, you should know. Blake left when Micah was 4, left hard, left clean, like pulling a bandage and some skin with it. He found a woman with teeth like a smile in a magazine ad, and a schedule that matched his plane tickets. He said words like space and figure things out, and the space expanded until child support became a rumor, and Micah's questions became the weather in our house. I sat with Ms. Kim in the hallway outside her classroom 2 days before the play. We spoke in fragments, the way people do when the truth is heavy, and the walls might have ears. He's proud of his narrator part, she said. He's been helping the younger kids with their lines. She looked down at her hands. June, he asked me if he should pretend to see his dad anyway. Something in me buckled. Quiet, but catastrophic. That was the moment the idea of pretending changed shape, turned from a trick to a shield. I asked her, if there were a miracle and I was in those rows, would anyone be hurt by it? She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, be early, be careful. So I planned. The thrift store suit, the cap, the mustache drawn with Rose's eyeliner. I practiced lowering my voice in the bathroom mirror, not because I needed to, but because I needed to feel capable. It isn't the transformation you imagine that saves you. It's the rehearsal that says, you are allowed to try. I printed my email exchange with the school and folded it in my pocket. I set an alarm to leave before the traffic pileup on Maple. I put a granola bar in my blazer because hunger makes fear louder. I kissed Micah's forehead and told him I'd see him sooner than you think, which wasn't exactly a lie, and wasn't entirely the truth. A friend once told me that motherhood is a long hallway of almosts. When I arrived, the lobby was a rustle of khaki and cologne. There were fathers who looked like soft mountains, fathers who looked like arguments you can't win, fathers who looked 14, holding infants as if they were made of permission. An usher with a sash that read, volunteer, smiled with the kind of smile that counts heads. Program? She chirped, and I took one with a hand that didn't shake as much as it wanted to. I felt like a secret walking upright. I found the seat Micah had told me about, and lowered myself into it like a diver into cold water. At first, all I could hear was my heartbeat, and someone behind me talking about golf. Then the murmur cooled, and I read the program to keep my eyes busy. That's when I saw the line about the Collins Family Foundation, and felt that old familiar shiver pass down my spine, the one I used to feel when Blake's mother would say, we do things a certain way, as if the word we were a country club whose membership card was a last name. I slid my hand under the seat to steady myself, and found the envelope, taped there carelessly or carefully, I couldn't tell which. My name was written in the looping hand of someone who learns handwriting from invitations. Not Ms. Mercer, not parent, just June. I looked around without turning my head, like prey taught by the woods. Then I peeled the tape and slid the envelope free. It was heavier than paper should be. Inside was a single page and something metal. The page said in neat blue ink, if you love Micah, don't make a scene. The metal was a key, attached to a tag stamped with a number, 3L27, a storage locker number at the school, if you'd lived enough days here to know. I didn't understand yet. I understood enough to realize that I was being handled. And if I was being handled, then someone expected me to do exactly what I'd planned. Sit, behave, be absent in the approved way. So I slipped the key into my pocket, and I sat still and I waited for the curtain. But the thing about waiting is this. It builds pressure, and pressure begs for release. The orchestra tuned. The fathers settled. The usher's smile sharpened. And somewhere near the back, I felt, rather than saw, a pair of eyes land on my borrowed cap. If you're still with me, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because in some zip code right now, another mother is deciding whether to break a rule that keeps her child from seeing her face. And if you think this is only about a play, let me promise you, what came next will make you reconsider how small a rule can look when it holds something very large in place. Because the moment the lights dimmed and the first narrator's voice trembled into the mic, the aisle filled with a figure I knew too well, and the night finally showed its teeth. Blake stood at the entrance like he was the show, not the audience. His cufflinks flashed the way money does when it forgets to be subtle. The woman on his arm, a woman I'd only ever seen on social media, always glowing, always holding a drink that cost what Micah's sneakers do, was even more beautiful in person. There's a particular humiliation in discovering that your ex's new life photographs. Honestly. She squeezed his forearm, and he wore that old expression I knew like a bruise, a smile that didn't reach the eyes, a performance given for the nearest lens. He scanned the rows like he expected the room to arrange itself to his preferences, and I felt the old choreography tug at my spine. Make yourself smaller, make yourself quiet, don't become a problem. But I wasn't married to him anymore, and I was wearing a mustache drawn with Rose's eyeliner, and I had a key in my pocket I didn't ask for. I swallowed, and the swallow felt like a promise to the version of me who used to apologize for existing. The orchestra hushed. The curtain rose an inch, then two. Beside me, a man in a navy blazer whispered a joke about the wife letting him out, and the row laughed in the sound that always skims my nerves like a stone over water. I adjusted my cap. I trained my eyes on the stage. Narrator 1, a sweet boy named Jordan, stepped to the mic. His voice was a thin ribbon pulled too tight. "Welcome to our Father's Day play," he said. A celebration of dads who, his eyes lifted, searching. And then I saw Micah behind him, small shoulders squared, eyes calculating. He was counting. 1, 2, 3 rows, left aisle, 2 seats in. I felt myself sit taller, even as I tried to sit lower. A hand landed on my shoulder. My stomach pivoted. "Excuse me," a voice said softly, the way a security guard says softly before they say firmly. I looked up into a face I didn't recognize. Volunteer, not faculty. He had the kind of smile people wear when they're about to deny you something. "We need to check tickets for the front rows," he murmured. "Tickets?" The flyer hadn't said anything about tickets. "New process," he added, though I hadn't asked. "Dads only. Partners are in the middle section." He waited. The cap itched. The mustache was a tickle I couldn't scratch. I lowered my voice as if lowering it were a key that opened a door. "I'm the father," I said, and hated how the sentence tasted like a lie and a truth at once. His eyes did the quick flick, cap, jawline, hands, like he was trying to reconcile my shape with his instructions. He nodded, slow as syrup, then gestured to the row where Blake had taken a seat and was already leaning back like the world ought to lean with him. "We're trying to make room for donors' families," the volunteer whispered. It was so soft I almost couldn't hear the words over the orchestra. "Would you mind moving 2 rows back?" I stared at him. 2 rows back would put me outside the space Micah had practiced looking at. 2 rows back would be the difference between my son seeing me and not. "I would," I said, equally soft. "I would mind." Something in my tone must have surprised him. He blinked. "I'll get the principal," he murmured. Of course he would. He left. I didn't move. My heart writhed against my ribs like a wild thing in a small cage. Ms. Kim appeared at the side stage, framed by velvet. She spotted me. Recognition flashed. And something else. A warning. She tapped her wrist like a clock. I understood. If I was going to be in that spot when Micah stepped forward, that moment would be now or never. I could feel the night shifting, the way the air changes before a summer storm goes from threat to downpour. And then a voice, rich and familiar as a bruise, floated over the backs of heads. "June?" It was a whisper, and it was not a whisper. I didn't turn all the way around. I turned just enough to see that Blake's eyes had found me, even inside the disguise. 10 years with a person trains you to recognize them in a crowd, and in their recognition of you. He wasn't sure, but he was close enough to certainty to be dangerous. His mouth curved. The curve said, "I see you breaking the rule, and I have a better one." He touched his phone. He stood up. The usher materialized as if conjured. "Sir?" she said to him, already deferential. "Is there a problem?" He smiled the way people smile at waiters they plan to undertip. "No problem," he said. "Just making sure my family gets the good seats." He cut his eyes toward me like a blade. Principal Price arrived at the end of the aisle, his tie shouting his importance. He leaned into the usher. She pointed at me. His gaze followed and landed. The expression that traveled across his face was less about me and more about hassle. A spreadsheet with a formula error. He approached and bent at the waist. "Sir," he whispered, extending his hand. "We've had some last-minute changes to the front row arrangement. May I see your ticket?" I wanted to laugh, not the good kind, the hysterical kind. "Tickets," I repeated, as if trying on a foreign word. He nodded, smile taut. I leaned closer. I'm Micah Mercer's father, I said, pulse in my tongue. He expects me here. The name did something to his posture. Just a flick. Mercer. He knew it. Of course he knew it. He knew it because somewhere behind him, a donor whose name was Collins was watching. He rocked back, then forward again, showing me the flipbook of his calculations. We've also reserved space for, special guests, he murmured. We want all our families to feel supported. Families. That word again, used as a rope. I reached into my pocket, aiming to pull out the printed emails, but my fingers found the key instead. The metal cooled my skin. It steadied me in the way that holding any real thing steadies you when the lies in the room feel like fog. I can show you my emails, I said. I asked for an exception. He held up a palm, a gesture that looks like patience and feels like power. We can discuss after, he whispered. The orchestra swelled. The curtain rose. He stepped back a fraction. In the sliver of space his retreat made, Ms. Kim peeked out again, and I could see the relief on her face when she spotted me unmoved. And in that moment, my decision sealed. I would not move. I would not trade my son's line of sight for their line of donors. I would be still, and I would be seen. Blake's phone glowed. He typed with the ferocity of someone who believes messages are levers. The woman at his side tilted her head and whispered, and he smirked. I knew his strategies. Make a scene and blame the other person for cleaning it. Play it calm, and then slide the knife. The usher fidgeted at the aisle's mouth. The volunteer reappeared, now with a second volunteer who looked like he played rugby with policies. We may need to relocate you, the second one murmured. For safety. Safety. The new favorite costume for control. Safety? I echoed, feeling heat bloom up my neck. Whose? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The answer was always theirs. On stage, the first scene began. A kitchen set, a paper sun in the corner, a boy actor calling, "Dad, are you coming?" The audience melted. The room leaned toward sentiment, like a plant toward light. I pictured Micah's cue approaching, his mouth forming the words he'd practiced, his eyes lifting to find me. If they moved me now, they would be moving my son's anchor. I gripped the armrest. The key dug into my palm. The paper in my pocket, a single page that had told me not to make a scene, fluttered like a trapped bird when I shifted. And then the unexpected happened. Imani appeared at the top of the aisle. She wasn't supposed to be here. Board members rotate presence, but she'd told me she had a conflict. She caught my eye and tugged her earlobe, our makeshift signal for hold. I held. She intercepted Principal Price before he could reapproach. Their conversation was a series of gestures and polite war. She pointed to the rows, the sign, the donors section. He pressed his lips, nodded, spread his hands. She leaned in and said something that made his eyes narrow, not with anger, but with the dawning recognition that he might be wrong in a way that writes headlines. He looked at me. He hesitated. Micah stepped to his mark. The light caught his hair and made a halo, and I hated the metaphor because it made him holy, and I didn't want him to be holy. I wanted him to be a kid whose mom could sit where he planned to see her. He paused, the way Ms. Kim had taught him, letting the audience's attention settle. He lifted his eyes. He counted. 1, 2, 3 rows. Left aisle. 2 seats in. His gaze landed like a touch. I felt it. I saw the relief pass through him, a small exhale that unknotted his shoulders. He smiled. He began his line. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," he said. And then, he did not follow the script. He took a breath. He leaned into the mic. He said, voice steady, "And if your dad isn't here, you can still say it to the person who shows up for you." A murmur lifted, rippled, settled. It wasn't scandal. Not yet. It was surprise that tasted like truth. He continued his monologue, slipping one extra sentence into the river of rehearsed lines, and I watched something powerful happen. The audience leaned in, not because they'd been told to, but because a child had handed them a better story. But the better story threatened the old one, and the old story had lawyers. Blake stood up. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood, the way a person stands when he expects the room to adjust. He looked at Principal Price. He looked at me. He looked back at the stage and then took a step into the aisle. The usher noticed. The volunteer noticed. The head of the Collins Family Foundation, otherwise known as his mother, noticed from her seat in the reserved section, her hand clamping her pearls like reins. Imani noticed. And I, still as a promise, watch my ex move in that smooth, dangerous way that says, "Watch me make this about me, and then blame you for the mess." He reached the front row. He leaned toward the stage like he might interrupt live theater. Ms. Kim blanched. The other kids watched him with the fascination we feel for a lightning strike. He raised his hand as if the play were a classroom and he expected to be called on. "Micah," he whispered loudly, then louder. "Buddy." A teacher appeared at his elbow, miraculously firm. "Sir, please return to your seat." He smiled his tight smile. "I'm his father," he said, and the word father landed between us like a claim. I felt the key in my pocket like a talisman. The envelope's warning scraped my mind. Don't make a scene. But a scene had been made, and not by me. I stood. The row breathed. I stepped into the aisle with the calm of a person who has decided to stop letting fear choose her life. The ushers inhaled as one organism. I kept my cap on. I kept my voice low. "Micah," I said, projecting just enough to float across the first row without snagging on the microphones. His head turned toward the voice he knows better than any sound this side of rain. He saw me. He smiled the small, secret smile he reserves for the moment before he does something brave. And then he did it. He lifted his script. He turned to the mic. "My dad couldn't make it," he said, clear as a bell. "So I invited the person who shows up." He pointed, not at me, but at the row where I stood disguised, and then at the back where Imani stood like a statue in motion, and then up toward the balcony, where the overflow room's live feed camera blinked its red eye. "All of them," he said. "The people who show up. That's who this play is for." The room moved. The movement was not a clap and not a riot. It was a long, slow shift of shoulders and minds. Principal Price's jaw worked. Mrs. Collins's pearls strained. Blake's face did something rare. It faltered. He reached for his phone again. He started to type. I saw the text arrive on my screen like a trap snapping. "We need to talk custody. Now." My breath hitched and then steadied. I could feel the cliff edge under my feet, and I could feel this. If I stepped back now, I'd be teaching Micah a lesson I don't believe, that being right requires being quiet. I took one more step into the aisle. A volunteer moved to block me. Imani slid between us like a door swinging open. "She's fine," she said, not asking. Her voice was velvet over steel. "Let the show go on." The volunteer hesitated. For one clean second, it looked like the better story might win by acclamation alone. Then Mrs. Collins stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Money speaks at a frequency institutions hear easily. "Dr. Price," she called, "I'm concerned about the integrity of this event." Integrity. That utterly pliable word. The room held its breath with something sticky and old. Ms. Kim put a hand on Micah's shoulder. He looked at me, at her, at the crowd, at the script, at the red light of the camera. I saw him make a decision he shouldn't have to make at his age. He placed his script on the stool. He stepped away from his mark. He walked to the edge of the stage and crouched, bringing his face closer to the front row. He didn't look at Blake. He looked at me. "Mom," he asked softly into the mic, a word that broke 3 rules at once. And suddenly, the rule that tried to erase me had to say my name out loud. When a 9-year-old boy says "Mom" into a microphone in a room designed to ignore her, the sound is an instrument for locating truth. You can watch it ricochet off banners about community and leave hairline cracks in their gloss. You can watch the people who own the room reach for their hammers, and the people who rent the room reach for their hands. Everything slowed at once and sped up at once, that strange dilation that accompanies the moment before a storm breaks. "Micah," I whispered, stepping forward. Volunteers reached. Imani's palm lifted in a quiet no. Ms. Kim moved to the edge of the stage like a net. Blake took one more step, his hand out as if the sheer gesture could rewrite everything that had just happened. His new partner touched his arm, uncertain for the first time. Mrs. Collins did not move, because women like her know the most efficient way to exert power is to let others perform it and then sign the receipt. Principal Price cleared his throat, the official sound you make when you need to herd meaning back into the fence. "Let's, proceed with the program," he announced. That firm, soft tone administrators learn in trainings with catered sandwiches. But the program had already become something else. Micah stood, and I saw the way his lower lip trembled and then decided not to. He looked out over the rows, and then he did the boldest thing I've ever seen him do. He invited me to the stage with a small wave. Rules will tell you that a mother in a mustache cannot accept such an invitation. Love will tell you that whatever breaks in your reputation will grow back stronger in your child. I put my foot into the gap between seat and aisle as if it were the space between a boat and a dock, and I stepped forward. The volunteer chose that moment to make his move. The gentle block. The smile that says no. I didn't push him. I did not need to. Imani stepped closer and spoke into his shoulder something about policy and precedent, and the optics of yanking a mother away from a child on a stage in front of donors. Optics is a word money respects. He hesitated. My foot found the carpet in front of the stage. June, Blake said. And this time, it was not a whisper. It was a warning shaped like a nickname. My name in his mouth has always been a rearrangement of my spine. He held up his phone, screen glowing with the contact of his lawyer, a name I recognized like a weather pattern. Don't, he said. Smile in place and eyes like January. Don't make this worse. Worse than what? I wanted to ask. Worse than a tradition that turns mothers into ghosts? Worse than a boy practicing a line to an empty seat? Worse than letters that never arrive and checks that due in amounts that humiliate? I didn't say any of it. I looked up at Micah, who was always my first and last audience, and I found in his eyes the real script. I reached up. Ms. Kim offered her hand. I took it. She helped me onto the lip of the stage like a midwife pulling someone into a different life. For one heartbeat, the room was quiet enough to hear the truth arrive. I turned to face the crowd. I could feel the mustache sweating off. I could feel my heart beating so hard it created its own percussion section. I didn't plan to speak, not at first. I planned to simply stand where Micah could see me. But sometimes standing is a speech, and sometimes a sentence finds you and requires your body to give it shape. I took the mic, gently, the way you take a fragile thing from a child. I leaned close enough that my voice could find the ears that needed it most. I'm Micah's mother, I said. A ripple, then two, a hiss of breath from somewhere rich. The usher looked at Principal Price. He looked at Mrs. Collins. She looked at the ceiling like God owed her a favor. I went on, steady. I am the person who signs the permission slips and the checks that stretch. I am the person who reads the story twice and the emails 3 times. I am the person who says good night and good morning. And tonight I am the person he needs to see. I could feel my voice sharpening, not into anger, but into shape. If this is a celebration of fathers, let it also be a celebration of the people who father without being called fathers. We are here. We are not overflow. It was not applause that came first. It was a single clap from the balcony, where the overflow camera blinked, followed by another from the middle rows, then a third from the aisle where a father with a baby strapped to his chest looked relieved at something he couldn't name. Applause is a decision a room makes together. Dozens of decisions clicked in quick succession. Hands met palms. It was not thunder. It was rain beginning. Blake laughed. That small laugh men use to signal to other men that they're above the moment. He stepped forward again. Great, he said, almost to himself. Performance art. He turned to the principal. You've let this become a spectacle. The principal looked like a man who had been handed 2 scripts and couldn't decide which one to read. Mrs. Collins stood finally, slow as a gavel. Dr. Price, she said, there must be order. What message does this send to our boys? Her voice was smooth marble. The room hushed, because a certain kind of quiet has been taught as respect. The message, said an unexpected voice from the back, that love shows up. It was Rosa, my neighbor, hands in her cardigan pockets, hair pulled back like a woman who knows work. She had slipped in without me seeing, probably after her shift, and before she had to pick up her grandson. She had a way of making truth sound like it belonged to you. The murmur grew. A teacher from 3rd grade, Mr. Patel, added softly, and that we can update traditions without losing our values. He shrugged at Mrs. Collins, with a kind of weary kindness that unnerved me with its bravery. Eyes swung to the donor's row like weather vanes. Micah squeezed my hand, the small solid press that brought me back from the edges. I have something, he whispered, and I leaned down. He reached into the pocket of his costume and pulled out a folded paper I didn't recognize. He unfolded it with the solemnity of an altar boy and handed it to me. I glanced at the top. It was a letter, written in his careful, pencil-pressed handwriting. Can I read it? He asked. I nodded and handed the mic back to him. The room adjusted, instinctively, to the truth that children wield best when adults complicate it. Dear whoever shows up, he began, voice unexpectedly steady, like the inside of him had decided not to shake. Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting me tell my story to your face. Thank you for not making me pretend I see someone who isn't here. He glanced at Blake, Not accusatory, just honest. And then back to the letter. I know today is Father's Day, and some kids have their dads, and that's cool. Some kids have stepdads or grandpas or uncles. I have my mom. She fixes things and cries in the shower sometimes and knows all the words to the song I like and is learning to whistle. She says that father is a verb too. So if you're here and you show up, happy Father's Day to you. It was not rain anymore. It was a storm that cleans. People stood. People cried in the quiet way you do when someone has handed you a mirror, and you look better than you thought. I saw a man wipe his eyes and not hide it. I saw a woman in the donor row look at Mrs. Collins like the spell had broken just a hair. I saw Ms. Kim press her fingertips to her mouth and then reach for the mic control as if to shield us if anyone decided to wrestle it away. Blake, cornered by softness, did what men like him do. He reached for paperwork. He moved toward me with a single folded document I'd seen before in long rooms with fluorescent lights. Emergency custody motion. He had hoped for an outburst to justify it. In its absence, he would manufacture one. If you think this stunt helps your case, he murmured low enough that only I, and perhaps the woman now reconsidering her place at his side, could hear, you'll learn something new about courts. He extended the paper, as if offering a napkin. You've always been dramatic, June. If you've never held the urge to throw a punch with your mouth, I wish that for you. I took the paper. I folded it once. I placed it back into his hand. And you've always confused control with care, I said, not above a whisper, and not below one. He swallowed, and for the first time that night, something like doubt crossed his face. Maybe because the room was not playing its usual part for him. Maybe because his mother's jaw had tightened. Maybe because his partner's hand slipped from his arm, as if she had realized she was touching a costume. He pocketed the motion like a man who would reschedule a fight. Then, from the side of the stage, a custodian in a faded Wildcats shirt raised his hand. Awkward and brave. 3L27, he announced, and I startled. That's the storage locker by the old gym. Somebody delivered a box this afternoon with that tag and asked me to hold it for Ms. Mercer. He looked toward me, through the mustache, through the cap, and I lifted my hand halfway. He brightened. Ah, good. Wanted to make sure it didn't walk away. The key burned in my pocket. The envelope had not been a threat. It had been a clue. I pulled the key out and held it up. The custodian nodded. After, he mouthed. After. It felt like a lever lowered somewhere, and I did not know whether it would lift or drop us. I squeezed Micah's hand once more and let the play continue, because the gift of that night was not mine alone to unwrap. It belonged to every kid whose line had needed a different ending. The show went on. Not the way it had been rehearsed, but the way life writes itself when the people in the room decide to stop defending the wrong thing. Children recited monologues and looked at the people who had shown up for them. Some looked toward empty seats and found kindness instead of pity staring back. The applause at the end was not polite. It was grateful. I stood there on the stage, mustache sliding, cap tilted, heart raw, and felt something unclench that had been making a home in my throat for years. But the night wasn't finished with us yet, because when the curtain fell and the house lights rose and the crowd started to move, a woman I didn't know pressed a business card into my hand and said, "Call me. I run a family law clinic." And behind her, another woman said, "I'm from the Gazette." And behind her, a dad touched my shoulder and whispered, "My brother is raising his daughter alone. He needs this win more than you know." And as I made my way off the stage, as Ms. Kim hugged Micah with one arm and handed me a tissue with the other, I felt a presence at my back that wasn't menace and wasn't mercy. It was curiosity. I turned. Mrs. Collins stood there, pearls quiet. Her face was not softer. It was simply more human than I'd seen it. "Locker 3L27, she said, and for a moment I could not locate my voice. "Why?" I asked. She glanced at Blake over my shoulder, then back to me. "Because sometimes the thing you give away says more about you than the thing you keep," she said, voice low. "Go see." And then, as quickly as she had come, she was gone, leaving the air around us in a new shape entirely. If you think that was the last surprise, if you think power only chooses one direction to lean in a night, you don't know how many hinges a door can have. The old gym smells like history, and sweat no mop can lift. The storage lockers are painted that knockoff institutional blue, rows of small metal doors with brass tags that time has tried to tarnish. Micah held my hand as we walked in, a flock of children still doing the chaotic math of post-show energy winging around us. Imani peeled off to brief a local reporter with surgical sentences. Rosa fell into step on my other side. a silent guard. The custodian met us at the corner where the lockers turned and gestured with a theatricality that made me love him. 3L27, he announced, like calling bingo. The brass tag winked. My fingers shook just enough to make the key miss the slot once before finding it. The lock was new enough to turn smooth. The door swung open, and a cardboard box sat inside, plain, taped, unremarkable except for the weight of meaning we had just hauled to meet it. I lifted it out and set it on the bench. I slit the tape with my thumbnail, and under the first layer of brown paper was a smaller box, wrapped in a scarf I recognized. Navy, with tiny silver stars. It had been my scarf the winter before Blake left. He'd hated the texture. I'd worn it anyway. Under the scarf was a stack of items that made no chronological sense and perfect emotional sense. A Polaroid of Micah at 3, cheeks like apples, icing on his nose, me in the background mid-laugh. A note in Blake's mother's hand, younger then, that said, "Thank you for the casserole." A Father's Day card Micah had made in kindergarten with crayon lines like topographical maps labeled, "To whoever packs my lunch." A thin envelope with a copy of an email I had written the week Blake left that began, "I will take the weekday nights if you want weekends," and ended with silence because he never answered. And at the bottom, wrapped in tissue with the care you give something fragile you don't know how to value, a watch. I knew that watch. It was Blake's father's. And then it was Blake's. And then it had become presence on a dresser in a house I didn't live in anymore. He had never offered it to Micah because objects to him were sentence endings, not beginnings. I lifted it into my palm. It was heavy, and it was not heavy enough to balance anything. There was a note under it, in the same looping handwriting that had labeled the envelope under my seat. A family can be measured by what it passes forward, not by what it hoards. MC Mrs. Collins, I realized with a jolt. Margaret Collins. My ex-mother-in-law had left this. This woman who had sat stone-faced while a room debated whether my visibility could be tolerated had also taped a key under my chair like a contraband mercy. "What is it?" Micah asked softly, index finger grazing the watch's face. "A compass that tells a story," I said, wishing for truer words. I held the watch out. "It's yours if you want it." He looked at it like a child looks at an adult's complicated apology. He took it, and then looked up at me. "Can I give it to Mr. Patel?" he asked. His watch broke last week, and he said he was saving up for a new one. I stared at my son and felt my heart do that frightening, glorious expansion it does when you realize you are raising someone better than your fear. "Yes," I said. "Please do." Rosa made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a prayer. Imani returned with a face that said headlines had been aligned. "Policy is paperwork," she said. "Paperwork can change. I'll draft language tomorrow that turns tradition into invitation. And no more overflow rooms for mothers, while men congratulate each other for being born male." She looked at Micah. "And you, narrator, will be cited in the minutes." On our way out, Blake appeared at the mouth of the hallway. He had lost the buoyant arrogance that makes rooms bend. In its place was something I had not seen in him in years. Hesitation. "June," he said. I kept walking until we were close enough for civility. He looked at the box in my hands. He looked at Micah, cradling the watch like a bird he planned to set free. He looked back toward the auditorium where the donors' row was packing up their judgments. "My mother," he began, then trailed. "She always liked you. She always liked herself," I said, and regretted it immediately, not because it wasn't true, but because weaponizing truth rarely builds bridges. He winced. He started again, the syllable a stone skipping. "You made me look bad," he finally said, "and it would have been funny if it hadn't been so sad." "No," I said, and kept my voice as unpointed as I could. "You made a rule that couldn't bear being seen." I stood where my son could find me. He opened his mouth and closed it, then looked at Micah. "Buddy," he said, and the word was small. "You did great." Micah nodded, polite as a diplomat. "Thanks," he said. There was kindness in it. There was also distance I had not built. Blake had. You cannot show up late to your child's heart and expect a front row seat. We left the school through the side doors, into a night that had cooled into something that felt like permission. The stars were ordinary, and therefore glorious. Micah swung our joined hands the way he does when he's unwinding. "Can we get pancakes?" he asked, more statement than question. "We can get pancakes," I said, and Rosa declared herself coming too. And Imani said she'd meet us after she sent one more email that would loosen a hinge the tiniest necessary degree. At the diner, under lights that have witnessed every kind of human vow, we ordered breakfast for dinner. Micah told me his favorite part of the play was the part where he got to say a line he wrote. I told him mine was when he remembered that telling the truth is a kind of safety you build yourself. Rosa told him he looked like a lawyer up there, and he rolled his eyes in the universal language of children refusing to be assigned futures at table 5. Imani slid into the booth at last and read us a draft sentence that replaced "Dad's only seating" with front rows reserved for a child's chosen support person, and Micah cheered like someone had just scored. I went home and washed the mustache off and cried in the mirror in a way you do when adrenaline sets down its bags and plans to stay a while. I tucked Micah into bed and watched him fall asleep with the loose-jointed abandon of the securely tired. I stood in the hallway and let the quiet collect in my chest like rain in a barrel. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote this, because stories become stronger when they are shared among people who need them. Here is what I learned. Fathers can be verbs, and mothers can be architects, and traditions can be redesigned if enough people stand in the place they were told to leave. Power sometimes sits in the front row, but so does love, and love is not nearly as polite. Love will put on a ridiculous disguise if that's what the policy requires, and then take it off on stage. Love will hold its child's gaze steady against a room organized to prevent it. Love will take a watch from a family that withheld and offer it to a teacher who shows up. Love will take a key meant to manage and use it to open a locker full of memories that can be redistributed into meaning. If my story met you where you needed it, if it reminded you of a night you chose your child over a rule designed to shrink you, I hope you'll subscribe so we can make this small, stubborn circle larger. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the name of the school with the cheerful flyer and the gate. Tell me how you got through. We are mapping a country of mothers who refuse to be overflow. And if you're someone in a room with a clipboard and a tradition, ask yourself the only question that matters. Does this rule make a child braver or smaller? Because when a 9-year-old lifts a mic and rewrites a line to make space for the person who shows up, the only thing left to decide is whether you will clap or change the program.